Joining us now on the program is a man who joins us each and every week to talk about the latest in economics and the markets. It's Michael Greiner, assistant professor of management at Oakland University's School of Business Administration. Michael, thanks for being with us today.
It's great to be here. Feels a little strange being here on a Wednesday, but I'm glad to be here anyway.
Yeah, it feels like it's just been maybe a couple of days since we last spoke, and that's because it has.
Yeah.
It's only been since last week Friday, but plenty has happened since then, or plenty we've learned since then that's impacting the markets and will be impacting our economy going forward. We just had previously mentioned on the program another point that Detroit Metro Airport was recently ranked number 4 in the world in terms of on-time departures. But that maybe not going to be such great news for people that were stranded at Detroit Metro Airport because of their Southwest Airlines flights during the holiday season, and that's having a big impact already on one of the largest airliners in the entire world. Southwest Airlines undergoing really a meltdown as a result of the fiasco during the holiday season. Just how much of a hit has this airline taken from that fiasco just a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, huge hits. And just as an aside here, one thing that you mentioned that I think is a great point is that we're very fortunate here in Detroit with our airport. We don't realize what a great airport it is compared to other airports. I've had the opportunity in the last couple months of being in especially some West Coast airports, and they are terrible, and you just can't get through security. And our security is much faster here. It's a much better place to be. So we're very fortunate in that regard. But you're right about Southwest. They are not doing very well. And it has to do with that storm that we had right around Christmas time. Now, that storm obviously affected all airlines, and all airlines to some extent had a certain number of cancellations as a result of it. But Southwest cancellations went on for days. And I'm sure everybody heard about that on the news. And I can tell you personally, this really affected me because usually for my Christmas vacation, I fly via Southwest to Baltimore, and they've got really good service there. This time, fortunately, we drove, but had we not driven, we would have been caught in this whole fiasco. And now it turns out that Southwest is going to basically turn what up until now had been a profitable year into an unprofitable year, losing $825 million or more as a result of this fiasco. Now, most of that money goes to a combination of either lost revenues or refunds that have to be given back to customers who were inconvenienced as a result of these cancellations. But one part that's untold at this point is how much it's going to cost them to address the fundamental problem here. You see, the reason this happened to Southwest and not to every other airline out there is that Southwest has been under-investing in their technology now for quite some time. There's some criticism there, frankly, by both travelers and some of the airlines unions about the fact that Southwest has been giving pretty substantial payouts to its shareholders over the past few years to the tune of about $10 billion, I believe, in the last 5 years, while at the same time not investing money into a new computer system, which everybody knew is desperately needed. In fact, they even talked about the fact that they had to make this investment in a securities filing that they made last year. So this was no surprise to Southwest or anybody who's involved in it. The problem is that they kind of have this balancing act of, do we invest here for the long run, or do we try to make the shareholders happy? And unfortunately, it appears that Southwest made the decision too much of trying to make the shareholders happy. Well, it came back to bite them in the butt. Southwest, as I say, they turned what had been a profitable year into an unprofitable year. And as a result of that, I think that there'll be a big rush for them to try to upgrade their computer systems. But at this point, it's kind of a cautionary tale, I think, for businesses that you can't just kind of keep putting off these long-term investments because you never know when something's going to happen that's going to cause a problem and really hurt your shareholders.
Another issue with Southwest Airlines and the problems that they had, because they weren't the only airline that had delay issues because of the storm during the holidays, but really it's the format that they run their airline that's so different from the rest of the industry, where these other airlines like Delta or American, they have their certain hub cities across the US where Southwest, while they're based out of Dallas Love Field Airport, their they don't really have set specific hubs all over. And so that ends up leaving them in a situation where if they have a mass amount of delays, their crews are behind 2-3 flights at certain times. And so they had to do what they did, which was have further delays and kind of do a hard reset. That's what's resulting in what's estimated at about $850 million in costs to get this thing right following the meltdown at the holidays. And some better news, another good jobs report came out recently. What sort of impact will that have on inflation, or how is inflation maybe related to that jobs report?
Well, what's interesting is a lot of economists are kind of characterizing this recent jobs report as almost a Goldilocks report, where we're kind of getting into just where we want to be. Now, granted, hiring is higher than probably is sustainable in the long run, but it's slowing down a little bit. Not so much though that people are starting to feel it. There's still pretty robust demand out there for workers. People are able to get jobs. The unemployment rate is still at a near historic low, and the essentially the quitting rate as well as the unemployment benefits rate, people filing for unemployment benefits, those are also very low. So it really shows some very strong, sustainable energy that we have within the jobs market, despite the concerns that many people have that we could be going into a recession. Now, the bigger issue, of course, is that the Fed has been watching the jobs market to say, is this going to be something that continues to power inflation? And if so, we need to kind of tap on the brakes by raising the inflation rate, or the interest rates, and continue to kind of slow down the economy so that we're able to get inflation under control. Well, part of the good news about this report is that it seems that wages haven't been going up quite as fast as they had been in the past. So the hope is that we're starting to see a slowdown in the increase in wages, which would then lead to a slowdown in inflation, while still people being able to find jobs. And that's kind of the goal here, which I think everybody is hoping for, which is that we get what's called a soft landing to this issue of inflation. you know, we've had experiences where, there's high inflation or some type of economic crisis, and then you have a terrible recession that follows. We had that happen, for example, after the 2008 financial meltdown. There are other examples where we had a bit of a financial issue, and then the economy was able to move forward with kind of a little bit of a bump, and we saw that in, say, the early 1990s. So the hope is that now we're going to experience something a little bit more like we had in the early 1990s than we had back in 2008 or the early 1980s. And we have this kind of soft landing where there's still jobs out there. Maybe we see a little bit of a slowdown in the increase of wages going up, which will allow inflation to come down a little bit. And hopefully that's going to be a sign to the Fed that maybe they can slow down on the increases in interest rates that they've been doing. And in fact, we have already heard some indications from some members of the Fed that maybe they should be looking at slowing down their rate increases. So hopefully this is a good sign. Hopefully this means that we're on the right track. It's too early to say that the job is done yet, but it probably is a good indication that we're at least heading in the right direction.
We're joined by Michael Greiner on today's edition of the Megacast, Assistant Professor of Management at Oakland University's School of Business Administration. You can find more information on Oakland University programs at oakland.edu. Another measure being taken by bureaucracy here in the United States, the Federal Trade Commission has put a pretty significant proposal out there that would block companies in some capacity from limiting their employees' ability to work for rivals within the industry, or non-compete clause. It's something that is pretty common across many industries, including in my industry in broadcasting. Dive into this a little bit. Just what does this proposal entail, and how might that impact some people's non-compete clauses?
Yeah, this is actually a huge issue, and I hope it gets a lot more attention in the media. I'm glad you brought this up because this might be one of the most significant proposals to come out of this administration so far, actually. And essentially, what the proposal is that the Federal Trade Commission has proposed a rule. This is the process by which, as you say, the bureaucracy will establish different governing principles. And the rule would disallow the enforcement of non-compete agreements. And what's more is it would require the employers to tell the employees that such that such agreements are unenforceable, and even if there's some confusion about it, the employer has to make it clear that's not the case. Now, the basis for this is some legislation in the FTC Act, namely Section 5, which says that the Federal Trade Commission has the ability to deal with non-competitive aspects of certain industries. The goal is to keep markets operating efficiently. And the goal is, of course, that basically employees and employers will be able to bargain for wages in a fair environment. Now, what non-compete agreements represent is that they represent essentially an example of market failure, where as a result of these agreements, suddenly much of the power of bargaining has been shifted over to the employers. Now, originally, non-compete agreements were seen as something that would particularly impact very valuable employees who, because of the fact that they're employed at one place, they could take certain assets with them as if they went somewhere else. And as you mentioned in the broadcasting industry, for example, if you were to go to, say, one of the competitors for Michigan TV, then probably those competitors would benefit from a lot of your viewers following them over to this new channel. So it makes some sense that somebody in that type of situation would be covered by a non-compete agreement. Similarly, if you're someone who's, say, a software engineer who has exposure to some trade secrets, that might be another example where maybe it makes sense to have a non-compete agreement governing your relationship with the company. But I got to tell you, the people who work for Jimmy John's down the street from me are also covered by non-compete agreements. And much as I love Jimmy John's sandwiches, if someone left Jimmy John's and went to work for Subway, it's not going to make some huge difference in the ability of Jimmy John's to be able to compete in the market. And that's really where the issue is here, which is that non-competes have become far, far too widespread, with millions of people, as much as 30 million people in the workforce now being covered by them. And the research here is unequivocal. And it says that basically the existence of non-compete agreements holds down wages. And there is strong evidence for the fact that wages would increase by as much as $250 to $300 billion across the economy if non-compete agreements were done away with. And the reason for that is that the best way that people are able to increase their wages is by switching jobs. And that's something that is a truism throughout the economy. So what non-compete agreements do is that they restrict people's ability to switch jobs. What's more is even where people aren't covered by non-compete agreements, it makes it so that employers might be more hesitant to, say, go out and hire new people because they're afraid that they're going to have to go out and research some non-compete agreement or make sure these people aren't covered by it. And it just makes the hiring process more expensive, so results in less hiring across the board. And just the fear of being covered by a non-compete agreement and what it could do to you will then restrict people's ability to move from one place to another. Well, the argument that the supporters of these non-compete agreements make is that it fosters innovation or it leads to companies investing more in their employees. But the best example of where we can see that this is not the case is if you look at the development of the technology industry between Massachusetts and California. I actually grew up in Massachusetts and remember back in, say, the late 1970s, early 1980s, there was a lot of talk about the Route 128 belt and how there was so much technology action going on there. And many people thought that Massachusetts was going to become the next big technology center in the world. Well, as it turns out, it had a competitor for that. And that competitor, of course, was Silicon Valley out in California. Well, we all know who won that race big time, and it was Silicon Valley. And there's very strong evidence to support the argument that the reason for that is that California has banned non-compete agreements while Massachusetts enforces them. So employees who are top employees and who have the energy and creativity that employers are looking for are able to be wooed from one employer to another. And when they go to an employer, they're offered high wages as a result of it. Whereas in Massachusetts, they're kind of stuck there, and that kind of results in people either leaving the state or in there being less dynamism and energy in the economy that is really what leads to the kind of innovation that we like to see and we've seen in Silicon Valley with technology. So I got to tell you, from all the research I've seen, I think it's a great move by the Federal Trade Commission. I hope that it gains approval. I've long, in fact, my students could certainly certify this. I've long argued that non-compete agreements are a real burden on our economy, and hopefully, this step will finally be something that moves us past this. Because really, the way that they've been used in the past few years has really been an abuse of what they were originally intended for.
One other way to spark more competition in the markets is to take companies that have a lot of their hands in a lot of different industries, or maybe you have a hold over one industry in particular, and sort of break them up. Something that happened recently was General Electric. Their former medical equipment business has now become independent, and that's also taking a bite out of one of the biggest companies in America, in GE, that owns a variety of different businesses across sectors. Tell us about this split and how that's having an impact both in its industry, but also on General Electric.
Yeah, great question. And this is another example of something where the industry research has been unequivocal. And I've been teaching my students about this for many years, actually, which is the fact that there is actually what's called a conglomerate discount. And that is that, generally speaking, conglomerates, where you have one company that buys up a bunch of other companies in different industries, that the conglomerates tend not to be very successful. That, in fact, generally speaking, a company that is in its industry operating on its own tends to be much more profitable than if that same company were included in some large conglomerate that includes many different companies. Now, back in the 1980s, there was this idea that companies wanted to buy different companies in different kinds of industries because it would essentially be what's called a hedge, where, say, if one industry was doing well, then the conglomerate would still be doing well. But if that industry didn't do so well, then the conglomerate would still essentially be able to be successful because it was supported by companies that it owned in other industries that were doing better. The problem is that that really does not jive with the way that our stock market works, which is that the investors are the ones who really should benefit from any kind of advantage that comes from this kind of diversification. And as anyone who invests knows at this point, the the investment advice that everybody follows is to make sure your portfolio is diversified. Well, the theory was with these conglomerates that the conglomerate could do the diversification for you, but then they'd have this whole bureaucracy at the top of it, which would essentially be sucking away any of the benefit that the investors would have gotten by diversifying their portfolio. So the advice since, say, about the 1990s has been break up these big conglomerates. And GE, which had at one point been one of the largest companies in the world, and certainly one of the largest conglomerates, built up over a number of years by former CEO Jack Welch, the what they are doing now is essentially finally moving to break up the company into pieces that are more manageable. This is the first step here, basically taking GE Healthcare, the healthcare division that makes things like some of the imaging machines that people may have had been exposed to in hospitals, for example. GE is huge in that. And this company, people expect, will be able to be much more successful now that it's off on its own rather than under this bureaucratic umbrella that GE was part of. Similarly, they are taking another step relatively soon where they're going to take their power and renewable energy component and spinning that off, where you're going to now have three different companies of what are formerly General Electric out there, each one focused on an industry. So you're going to have one that is healthcare, one that is power and renewable energy, and one that's like the household goods that everybody's familiar with. And each of these companies will be able to operate much more efficiently without this bureaucratic overhead that the conglomerate included. And as such, there's an expectation that more value will come to the shareholders and ultimately to the employees and everybody who works there. Well, we already saw evidence of that. Both GE Healthcare and General Electric, the company that's spinning it off, both saw their share price increase on Wall Street after the spinoff was finalized. So it appears that this is going to be a good move for GE. But it just shows that this idea that we can grow our company by just buying up a bunch of companies is a bad strategy, and more and more we're seeing companies move away from it.
Well, there's plenty more we'll probably see in the future as this change from GE impacts both GE and GE Healthcare going forward, and plenty more to talk about in the economy next week when we resume our weekly conversations with you on our regular day. Michael, thanks as always for joining us.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, and let's all hope for very little snow tomorrow.
Absolutely. Michael Greiner from Oakland University. You can find more information on programs at their School of Business Administration at oakland.edu. We'll take a break on the other side. When we come back, we'll talk to Dr. Jamie Tawil about why it's important as we begin a new year that you and your kids check in with their primary care provider and what that can do to prevent some common ailments from turning into some major issues for you and yours. That's coming up next on the Megacast.
Hey Laker fans, do you know a friend or neighbor that volunteers in Greater West Bloomfield? We would love to help you recognize them at the 51st Annual Michigan Week Awards. Countless members of the communities of Orchard Lake, Keego Harbor, Sylvan Lake, and West Bloomfield give their time and talent daily without regard for recognition. You can help recognize these individuals and organizations at our awards breakfast next year on May 12, 2023. Nominate your neighbor or organization starting January 28, 2023. Go to michiganweek.org for details.
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. Learn more about our program on our website, civiccentertv.com/megacast, with links to all of our partnering stations, as well as to find all our full shows and each individual interview on demand as well. civiccentertv.com/megacast, the place to go for that. Joining us now is Dr. Jamie Tawil, an internal medicine specialist at Grand River Medical Associates, as we begin a new year, and people maybe hopefully are going back to their primary care providers once again for those annual checkups. Dr. Tawil, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me as always. How are things?
Doing well over here. How are you doing?
Doing well. Keeping busy.
Yeah, good to hear that you're keeping busy, especially as we get into a new year. And after the last few years, of course, seeing many in the medical industry talk about people being more hesitant to go to their doctors. That's certainly changed over the last year or so as people have been more comfortable to get back and out into their community and back to some semblance of regular life as the pandemic has wound down in some regards. But just how important is it as we're getting into a new year for people as they're focusing on their health and as they're focusing on their family's health as well, to get those regular checkups? How much of an impact can that have on someone's regular health, overall health?
Oh, definitely a huge impact. I mean, that's something that's always going to be recommended. I've said it a million times, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So anything that we can do to get on top of any potential diseases that are brewing are definitely going to be things that would be recommended. So in other words, getting a regular routine checkup, it's not just about coming in saying hi, making sure everything's okay. We're checking everything. We're checking for age appropriate cancer screenings that we can get in front of. We're checking you for diabetes. We're checking cholesterol and your risk for heart attacks. We're also trying to make sure that you're, having the conversations that people should be having. Are you having an appropriate diet? Are you exercising? Any questions that you have for your physician that you may not know? These are all things we want to address. So those are things that are going to definitely be recommended. Your yearly preventative, checkups and things to that effect. You never just want to see a doctor when you need to. You want to see one before you need to. That's hopefully the point that we're trying to get through.
And just how often should these be happening? We talk about it, it's beginning of the year, it's a new time it's time to kind of sort of renew your goals for the next year and think about your health, as many do at this time. But is there a certain timeline of how often people at various ages should be seeing their primary care provider?
Absolutely. Above the age of 18, I mean, I would like to recommend you get seen at least once a year. If you're young and healthy and have no medical concerns, a yearly checkup shouldn't be a bad thing. And if you're getting a little bit older and you have other medical problems, your doctor typically will set the timeline for how often you should be seen. For conditions such as diabetes, you want to be seen every 3 months to check those levels to make sure that you're having adequate control. You want to also keep checking in to make sure that your weight's not spiraling out of control or that it is being controlled. We want to know that the things that we're recommending are actually working. I usually like to say that I would probably like to see you at least as much as a dentist would. So I think bi-yearly exams are, routine checkup after the 6 month mark with a yearly physical, always a good idea.
And for parents too, how often should those checkouts be happening for kids, especially as they're developing and they're exposed to a variety of different germs and illnesses through school and through social events? How often should they be getting checkups with their primary care provider?
Well, I'm not a physician, but I imagine that this timeline would be essentially the same, at least yearly before school starts. And at a minimum, I would suggest maybe a 6 month checkup in the halfway point of the year. However, that might be different for your pediatrics. Please forgive me.
We're joined by Dr. Jamie Tawil from Grand River Medical Associates, internal medicine specialist. On today's edition of the Megacast, you can find more information and get in contact with them at grandrivermedical.com. Grandrivermedical.com, their website for more information. And as we talk about getting back out into the communities a little bit more in the past year, and certainly that will continue in 2023 if all goes well. At the same time, this particular season, typically the time of the year we're seeing flu cases increase, certainly pre-pandemic when people were more active. And now we're seeing two strains of the flu with COVID-19 and also RSV in our schools. So at this time, how much of an issue are respiratory viruses in comparison to last year as people were starting to kind of get back out into regular life, and certainly looking at metrics pre-pandemic, as that would be the most accurate way to look at now versus then as people are back out and about?
Well, definitely. Things are a little bit crazier because there's no longer any restrictions that we had like we had with COVID. So a lot of those other things that weren't really hitting us as hard. But now people are out, people are doing their thing. We recently had the holidays kind of come through here, so we had a bump in some of those cases. Flu came a little bit early this year, and we're starting to see that drop off just a bit. I'm seeing still a lot of COVID blowing around, but a lot of more milder cases. So the triple threat that we're getting hit with is COVID, flu, and RSV, and all three of those can really impact people. So it's just you got to be more cautious as best you can. RSV can be a little bit more contagious as it not more contagious, but more easily spread because it can survive longer on inanimate surfaces. So that someone coughs on something and gets touched later. That's how it can be spread, as opposed to flu and COVID, which are basically air droplets that are transmitted through the air. So things are a little bit dicey. And now that we're having multiple things hit us at once, whereas a few years back we were only dealing with really COVID as the big gun. It's getting on people.
And even as we're seeing the regular flu season come through, and you talk about all these different respiratory illnesses and other illnesses that we're seeing a little bit more commonly now, or we're hearing, or we've certainly heard more commonly about over the last several years, given the case of the pandemic. This year, we're hearing a lot about different strains of the flu virus, particularly A and B, have been spreading around a lot of late. Is this something typical that we see various strains of the seasonal flu year in and year out, or is this something atypical from what we've seen in the past? Because really, for me, it's the first time I've been hearing pretty frequently about different strains of the flu going around.
No, I think that this does happen. It's not as common, but it does happen. And, oftentimes the flu vaccine is our best guess to what the flu will be. And then we get flu coming through and there's different strains. So this is typical for the course. I think it's just we're a little bit more alert. The antenna are up because of COVID, and everybody's starting to get really concerned about these respiratory viruses that we can get because they are really kind of hitting us heavy this year. But yeah, there are different strains of the flu that go around just as much as there are different strains of COVID, and these things do happen. And getting the vaccine definitely does help prevent those things. Um, it, Unfortunately, we're trying to be as one step ahead as we can, and we're doing a pretty solid job. The flu vaccine is pretty effective this year, and it's been reducing a lot of illnesses. So
You can find more information on seasonal flu and the various strains, as well as other information about ways you can battle the flu, prevent the flu, and what you should be doing depending on your symptoms in terms of treatment by going to cdc.gov/flu. We're joined by Dr. Jamie Tawil on today's edition of the Megacast from Grand River Medical Associates. More information and get in contact with them, grandrivermedical.com. Megacast.com. Dr. Twill, before we let you go, anything else that we should be keeping an eye out for or should be keeping on our mind right now about our overall health from frontline primary care providers like yourself?
Absolutely. The thing I want to talk to people about is a lot of people gained a lot of weight during COVID. I am no exception to that. I want people to start trying their hardest to get back on track because the next thing is always going to be there. I mean, I'm not suggesting that it's a doom and gloom thing, but we're always going to be hit with illnesses. That's what we are. That's who we are as people. So trying your hardest to be the most healthy that you can get so that you don't get hit with those illnesses as aggressively as others could be would be ideal. Routine checkups, conversations with your physician about weight loss, things to that effect, making sure that you're adopting a healthy diet, making sure that you're trying to exercise, making sure that you're eating right, all the fun stuff. But basically, a best defense is a good offense. So, and the best way to do that is to just make sure that your health is intact, checking with your doctor to see if you have any underlying conditions that need to be immediately addressed. And if not, at least just maintaining a healthy weight and lifestyle. Don't smoke, all the fun stuff.
More information and to get in contact with Dr. Twill and the team at Grand River Medical Associates at grandrivermedical.com or call them 248-264-6169. Dr. Twill, thanks for joining us.
Thank you as always. Always a pleasure to be on. I appreciate the time to talk.
Yeah, glad having you on as well. grandrivermedical.com, their website. Get in contact and find more information. We'll take a short break here on the Megacast. On the other side, Dave Dulio from Oakland University will join us to talk about the latest in the world of politics as we have a new Speaker of the House, and soon here in Michigan, we'll have a new senator as well. That's coming up next. You're watching and listening to the Megacast.